Alright, good morning. Starting with a disclaimer, get it out of the way. I'm not a financial advisor. Nothing in this video is financial advice or recommendation to buy or sell any financial product. All content is for informational purposes only based on my own personal opinions and experiences. Trading futures, options, and other financial instruments involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for every investor. You can lose more than your initial investment, so always do your own research and consult with a licensed financial professional. Okay. And now that that's done, let's get started on here. So we'll start with the news, actually. Where did I put the news? Here, so we've got Fed speakers at 9 and 9:30, and then we've got more Fed speakers at 2. 4:30, we've got the API, Crude Oil Stock Exchange, and then 6 p.m. is another Fed speaker. These two are after crude closes, so not that big of a deal. So let's go to the pre-market sheet here. So we're opening in an imbalanced condition, gap higher, as you can see from the prior day. We are gapping higher. Still no one time framing. You haven't broken this prior week's high. It would be this 64.18. You would need to break that to be one time framing on the weekly time frame. Like I said, this swing low is still weak. That's a given. I said we're still sort of shifting value higher with some overlap. Like no overlap here, but then you came back down. You filled in this partial gap, and then you started moving higher. So the trend higher is, in my eyes at least, is still continuing for now. For now, at least, right? Yeah, decent high and low, decent excesses from the profiles yesterday. I said the high is weak-ish. The low is pretty good. You can see on the volume it's a good taper as well. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, right? Like value area is sort of expanding. We're sort of, since we're overlapping, the volume's increasing across this whole sort of range. No real bias in terms of direction. My general gap rules for like a gap day is, well, are we going to gap and go, or are we going to close the gap and revert? Or some days you have it where we kind of just sit sideways. So those are sort of the three generalized options I have, or scenarios I have for gap days. So for key levels, we've got, I'll go to the PNF because I don't have. We've got these singles, all these singles in this sort of red. We've got singles above. We've got overnight high, and then we've got prior week settle, prior week high, and those will be the key things to test on the high side for me today, at least. Like I said, that would extend. That wouldn't start one time framing higher on the weekly, so that's important. And then I said, you also have singles below you. You've got yesterday's high, which is here, which would be gap close. You've got overnight low, which is a precursor to the high, yesterday's high. And then you've got settle. And then really the rest is just the value area. Much below settle is just like the POC and the VPOC of yesterday, which was, a nice belly. So, yeah. So if we look at the TPO, like I said, my generalized rules, not really rules, but I guess coming into gap days, I'm usually looking for, especially when it's, I guess, this dumb pen, man. Especially when it's a bigger gap. A gap that is not going to be closed, within, the first 5 minutes of the day, like yesterday. Like yesterday we opened right at the high, and then we just came down and we closed the gap in like the first 2 minutes or something. So that's not really the case today because you have a pretty large gap, like right now at least. What are we sitting at? Maybe 60 ticks. I can't really see what that number is. 62, 69 maybe. whatever, between 50 and 70 ticks we've got probably. So it's a good distance, right? So it's not like it can still be closed, but it's not going to be closed, I guess, instantly right off the open. So yeah, now that I can draw, the general rules is going to be, gap and go, which then this becomes a key area to test, which lines up with the prior week settle and stuff. And if you can get above that, then it's really just can you stay above? Like we have everything above this high is all gap. This is all prior gaps from like initially when all the tariff news had come out. So really, it's all just backing and filling type of action, filling in as much as it can. There's a bunch of naked stuff. There's a cluster of naked prior week stats right here. Or you get the gap and revert where you come down, you close the gap, and then from here, from the gap close, sometimes you go a bit further and then you bounce. Sometimes you bounce right at the gap close and move higher, and then sometimes you do just continue lower and you stay below settle, or you check the POC and you kind of turn sideways. So all of that is sort of in play. Like I would say for me, key levels are going to be this gap close, this cluster of VPOC, POC, and prior week settle right here. And then this stuff down here, the settle and the POC of yesterday. And obviously this yesterday's high lines up all right with, this sort of terribly made value area below from Thursday or whatever. So those are going to be the key areas, and then really you're just looking for the reaction. So like if we can, impulse above this, and yeah, that tells us bullish. But if you're kind of rounded, you kind of make a rounded top and you fall lower, and then you do this, and then maybe you're not as bullish. So things like that. Like there's nothing necessarily specific I'm looking for in these areas. I'm more just looking for how they react. How they react when and if we do get there, or if and when we do get there. We've obviously got these singles here too, which could lead to a more balanced open where you sort of open at the singles and you, before doing any major moves, you just come up and close the singles, and then maybe you make a run for gap close and then you bounce off that or something. So there's lots of options today. I would say I have no clear bias on like the higher time frame really, or like the weekly time frame at least. Like I kind of think everything could be in play today in terms of like the gap close, the gap and go, or just sort of the sit sideways type of scenario. So yeah, it's more, I base those decisions off of, how we react at these certain levels that I'll be watching. So yeah, so we can go to the 30-minute. Maybe we can get a bit more information from the overnight session. Overnight session, decent belly. Decent belly from the overnight session. I would say I would classify this probably as the value area. So this range, I guess the upper 2/3 of the singles could another reason lead to chop. But as you can see, overnight inventory is pretty much 100% long. Overnight inventory is just what percent of the session traded above, below, or through settle. So like you can see overnight starts here. It's probably 100%, if not, like 95% long for the overnight inventory. So if that is to continue, then I'm just going to try and get on. That could continue, though, even after we close the gap, right? So it's not necessarily an off shorts kind of bias, but, it's there and it should, be important, right? To me at least, or it is important to me at least. Um, so I'll be watching that. Like if that's to continue, then really it's just get long, right? Like if we get an early break of overnight high or something like this, and we come back and we hold the POC of this area, or we come down and we even close up the singles, but then we can't really get any further. That all sort of tells me the same thing, right? So anything like that would be good for me. Um, yeah, and like I mean that's pretty much it. Like we can get into the price action a bit in more detail, but I'll just do it when we draw. So I'll just get to that now. Um, so let's make sure we give ourselves enough room here. We've got settle. Not much below settle is the prior VPOC area, prior POC. And then we've got a weekly high. Okay, so we've got everything in. So we've got yesterday's high, yesterday's settle, yesterday's VPOC slash POC. And like I guess we've got yesterday's low, but that would be really extended for me at least. All of these levels are pretty important. You've got overnight low, you've got overnight VPOC slash value area, overnight high, and then you've got prior week's settle and prior week's high just above. So quite a lot, but it's all the important stuff for me, right? Prior week's settle, overnight high, overnight value area, overnight low. Overnight lows usually on gap days for me, overnight lows I'll always mark down because they're usually a bit more weighted. This is just an observation. It could be fully wrong. But because the prior high and the prior low are usually further away on, I guess, gap days, like we're not near yesterday's high or low. And so because of that, I find usually that reaction you would get maybe at yesterday's high or yesterday's low, you get sometimes at overnight low or overnight high. This is yesterday's low, but that's just an observation. Like that, could be completely wrong. It's just something I at least think I've noticed. But yeah, so gap and go day, pretty clear, like a fully bullish day. Yeah, like you don't really want to see anything get below this overnight value. Like maybe a shallow pullback to this overnight VPOC area that just impulses and breaks overnight high early. If you break overnight high pretty early and you can stay above, then we could just see this continue sort of in a grindy fashion higher. All the way up to obviously the prior week's high and the prior week's settle. This would be a key resistance area. And then, like I said, anything above this prior week high is all gap. So, yeah, so it's all just naked stuff. It's all really just zone to zone for me because we haven't really traded there at all. And so, yeah, I'd just be zone to zone. And I likely, if I wasn't in a trade already, probably wouldn't engage unless there was like an A+ setup there that I could use or that, presented itself. But yeah, so this area, prior week high, prior week settle in that value area from Thursday will be key to see if buyers can get through. More again as an extended. Overnight high is going to be the first thing that if we can't really get above, maybe buyers just aren't as aggressive as they were in the overnight session. Goddamn. Yeah, and that would be like the most bullish scenario with like, I guess, very shallow, if at all, pullback right in the morning. The full bearish scenario would be pretty much the exact opposite, right? You get down, you close up the lower portion of the singles, and then ideally you test this overnight value area from below. If you can break below it and then hold below it, that'd be a good sign for me, just for like a trade to overnight low. Overnight low slash gap close area. You have both of those, I guess, stats to lean on there as well. Getting much below that, obviously, this is a 5-day VPOC and settle. That's the next key area. That'd be another key support area. And then, like I said, much below that, if you're staying below that, next area would be the value area of yesterday. And then below that is just yesterday's low as a really far, like extended target. That probably won't be significant at all today. So I'm not going to draw it 3 times, but this cluster here of yesterday's high, settle, overnight low, and the value area, all of this whole cluster here could lead to solid support that then bounces into a more bullish scenario. So if you come down, you close up most of these singles, you come down, you close the gap, you tag settle, you get the stats, and then you start moving higher, depending on how fast it does it. We probably wouldn't get to the prior week's high in the day session at least, but we could potentially continue, as far as we could, and with the time we have, to, continue moving higher, right? Like, that's the overall trend, I guess. And like I said, with the overnight inventory, it's 100% long, so we know this, we know buyers were present here because, well, we traded, we instantly got above it and we continued higher, right? The rest of the overnight session. So we'll be watching this area very closely if we get down there, because it could go either way. From here, from this point, it could go either way. And then depending on where it goes, dictates, I guess, the rest of the day, right? Like, if we continue lower, we sort of get into the extended targets now, and so that would probably be something I'd maybe stay away from, unless, again, it was really clean. But we could also bounce and move higher and just sort of transition into this scenario, right, where you pop back above overnight VPOC area, and, ideally give us a test from above that holds, and then continues for the rest of the singles for overnight high, potentially prior week settle, but again, that's quite far in terms of range for crude, so I don't know if it'd do that all in one day. But that's really what I'm working with here, so I'm just going to pause this quickly to take my snapshot of it. Alright, I just took my snapshot. It's all erased now, so that's the plan, or I missed one. That's the plan for the day. I forgot to mention that I didn't post an end of day video yesterday because, well, we did nothing and I took no trades. As you can see, this was crude yesterday. We were, we did nothing. We were sideways the whole day. This is the show trades button. So you can see nothing shows up. So there was no trades. And so I figured, because it was such an uneventful day, I figured, that if I were to do a video on it, it'd be pretty uneventful as well. It'd be like 3 minutes probably. But yeah, so I did nothing, and so I decided not to make the video. So I'll probably continue with that. I'll only do the end of day videos on days where I've actually taken trades. But other than that, yeah, like, that's the plan for today. I hope, it was at least semi-coherent, you could understand it. And yeah, I'll be back tomorrow.